everyone. Welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. I'm excited because I rototilled our garden last evening, and so going to be planting vegetable gardens. And so it's a little later than I normally would have, but as I've mentioned before in the podcast, my 10-day window for planting in spring is May 15th to the 25th. I kind of look at that time period to see kind of what's the weather been like. And so I'll be within that 10-day window for getting the vegetables in the ground. A little later maybe than sometimes I have. Some years have been more like the 15th. This year it's going to be more towards the 25th when I get everything on in. But I'm excited. Gosh, I enjoy rototilling so much. The rototiller is one I inherited from my dad. It's 50 years old, a Troy-built horse, it's called. Okay. And it chugs along, does a beautiful job. So anyway, I'm all keyed up for that. How's everything around your yard doing?
Well, it's some things are coming in slow. I've just noticed the other day, like a stilby are really just kind of barely peeking up, but other things, our bleeding hearts are blooming.
Have you got some vegetables planted yet in the raised planters?
We do have some vegetables. The lettuce is starting to perk up. I think maybe some kale is starting to peak up there. So some of those things, the leafy greens are kind of coming up.
Yes, and speaking of leafy greens, I've got some volunteer lettuce popping up in the garden.
Oh, really?
So I rototilled, but I thought, well, my gosh, I'm not gonna rototill those under because there's some freebies there. And so and of course lettuce goes to seed. At some point it bolts. Is the term for sending up the seed stalk when the temperatures start getting hot in summer. So obviously it spreads some seed. So now I've got some nice little volunteer. I suppose they're probably an inch high or so, but a nice start on some lettuce. So I'm carefully going around those with the rototiller. So I'll have a couple little patches of lettuce.
I'll tell you what did come in full force tarragon. Our tarragon came back and it's raging.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Now, is that coming back from the original plant or from seed?
Yeah.
So, so the tarragon did winter for you.
Yeah, it did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, well, so today we're gonna talk about some different things. We're gonna talk about what the weather. This has been an odd spring, and we're gonna talk about
been an unusual spring.
We're gonna talk about some of the things about how we should go about it, what that means, and going forward, what we should be doing. But what else is blooming for you right now?
Well, when I took a walk around the yard last evening, the tulips are just finishing.
Okay,
tulips are just finishing, but they lasted quite a while. We're going to talk about how this spring has been chilly and cool, many things delayed. But on the upside, flowers like the tulips seem to have lasted longer.
I noticed that our neighbors across the street, theirs finally opened, and they have been up for probably a week and really looking good. And I'm going to send them a text. I'm like, do you not get rabbits? Did rabbits not cross the street? Because they chewed down ours. Ours never got a chance to pop up to a stem.
That's disappointing. But the death knell for tulips when they're in full bloom is a 90-degree hot wind. That'll just sap them within hours. So it's been nice, one upside on the cool weather. The other thing, we've got a variety of iris, a few different types of irises. And I've got a little miniature one, purple, and those are only maybe 2 to 3 inches high. And those are done blooming already. They bloom nicely. But now the intermediate size of iris are just now in full bloom. And when I say intermediate size, I suppose they're maybe 8 inches high. And so it's fascinating to me how on iris you get these different blooming times. The shorter ones start early in May, and then now mid-May to third week in May come the next highest height. They're blooming nicely. And of course, then the taller iris, the bearded German type iris, those will be in June. So I'm enjoying the blossoms of iris.
Speaking of blossoms, when you were talking about kind of the the death of tulips, the thing that's or the flowering tulips is a dry, hot wind. One of the things that I've noticed too, things that have stayed in bloom that I always attributed to wind and rain, the crab apples are really looking great.
Yes.
And they've held on for a while. Do they hold on? Are they holding on because there hasn't been much wind, there hasn't been much rain, or there hasn't been heat, or all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah, because, a rain can certainly kind of beat those down, as can a wind. But also if we get those 90-degree hot, dry winds, that just saps them. And, they can last a day or so. But the cooler the weather, the longer they last also. Which is nice. So it's been, I think, a nice spring for that. Also, the fruiting type apple trees, they've been in bloom quite a while. And now I'm knocking on wood. I hope that the recent frost that we had didn't damage the flower petals or the pollen inside. So I hope we have a decent apple crop. And so the temperatures, the frost that we did get recently, I don't think was cold enough to damage the flower. So let's hope we get a good fruit crop. Also, the plum trees, which bloom a little earlier than apples, our plum tree is about done. But our Canada Red Cherry is just in huge full bloom right now. And we've got one outside the back door, and the aroma, the fragrance of that is just awesome. And of course, Canada Red Cherry, the flowers are kind of in hanging clusters.
Okay.
Hanging clusters, I suppose, probably 2 to 3 inches long. If you picture a hanging cluster of chokecherry berries,
okay.
Of course, these flowers are in that same shape, and then each of those little petals type things will turn into a berry. So if the birds don't get them, I might have, because the Canada Red Cherry is just a purpley form of the native chokecherry.
Okay.
And so it can be used the same thing if the birds don't get them. So I've enjoyed watching that, and the other blooming type trees. Our fernleaf peonies are just now getting ready to bloom. The blossom is still tight, but they're going to be opening. The fernleaf peonies are fascinating. Have you ever grown those?
We have one, yeah. And I'm kind of, I think we'll need to move it. So I suppose we'll wait until after they bloom. And then would it be okay to move it then after they bloom?
The preferred is actually in the fall, around Labor Day for peonies. If a person had to, for example, if there's construction or something going on that a person would need to, then a person could, usually with success. But the preferred, most successful time is in September.
But yeah, we inherited one, and it's been holding in there. It's been doing great, and really looking forward to that.
The fernleaf peony is oftentimes nicknamed the Memorial Day peony because they usually hit about Memorial Day. And ours this year, of course, Memorial Day moves around a little bit, but ours should just about be fully open on Memorial Day. They are expensive in garden centers.
They are.
Have you ever priced those?
I've seen them, and I've also had people talk about, trying to find people who are looking to get rid of them that they can.
Exactly.
Be a great
and they don't multiply as rapidly as the standard old-fashioned peonies, and so because they don't produce little offsets as rapidly, then that's why the supply is usually less.
Yeah.
And the price goes up too.
Definitely something that we want to hold on to and take care of. So
exactly,
we'll wait until fall.
Because a fernleaf peony, that can easily last 100 years or so, like the other peonies.
Yeah. Well, let's first of all, we'll get into some of the talk about how to deal with this late spring season. But first of all, you've got a letter from a listener.
Yes, from Nicole. Okay, Nicole begins. Hey, this is Nicole in Duluth writing to you. I heard on recent podcasts you talking about lupins along Minnesota's North Shore. I agree with you that they are really beautiful. I was born in Duluth 50 years ago, so I've watched the proliferation of this plant really take off, especially over the past decade. They are just about to burst into bloom everywhere, and it will be truly stunning. I am linking an article from Minnesota Public Radio about these lupins. In summary, there are two kinds. The non-native big leaf lupin, That's the kind you see everywhere up here, and a less showy native kind. This is the one that hosts the endangered Carner blue butterfly. The big leaf lupin arrived as a volunteer in my own yard about a decade ago, and I've kept it, but I work every year to contain it to a small section of the garden, and I deadhead it before it goes to seed. I've also planted the native kind, and it's not as aggressive a spreader as the big leaf lupin. I think that your podcast guest was wanting to plant some lupins, and I would suggest that people plant the native version if they can. The other kind is beautiful, but really doesn't need our help to spread. Thank you for all the great gardening info. Looking forward to another great growing season from Nicole.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's great. And so I looked up the news article from NPR that Nicole referenced, and a wonderful write-up about the lupins in Duluth. Now, Mary and I were in Duluth in June last year, and we were just amazed at all the beautiful lupins growing wildly in the ditches.
Yeah.
Kind of on the edges of the trees and things, just amazing. And we thought, wow, what a beautiful wildflower that.
And so for people who don't know, because we're looking at some pictures here, how would you describe the flower here? It's very much of an upright.
It's a spike-shaped flower, and shades of blue, purple, pink, rose-colored. They're white. And so the flower spike rises up above the foliage, and the foliage is kind of a palmate leaf, kind of in the shape of one's hand. And so apparently, as they mentioned, that it is kind of within the last 10 years that this has spread. It spreads by seed, it sounds like, and it obviously loves the soil up in that Duluth area and the kind of the cooler climate that is up in that area.
Just looking at the picture, it reminds me a little bit of like a foxglove in kind of appearance.
Yeah, it's got kind of that
the same kind of the stalk,
similar
upright.
type of a stalk. And I was totally, when we were up there, I was totally amazed that something growing wildly like that could be so beautiful and picturesque. Now, the article, as I read the article, it says that the lupins have been controversial. Okay, they weren't native to Minnesota. They were brought in from the West Coast, and so they spread by seed. And sometimes when you bring in a non-native, and they don't have natural predators, they can go to town. Well, dandelions were brought onto this continent, they're not native, and they've done quite well for themselves too. So these lupins are spreading by seed, and the controversy comes in where people think, well, they're beautiful, they're doing well. Why should we get rid of them? But anything that becomes and spreads like that that's not native can crowd out some of the native type things. And some of our native insects and things are adapted to feed on the native type things, such as that butterfly that they mentioned. The butterfly that was mentioned there specifically needs the wild native lupin, similar to monarch butterflies needing milkweed. And the big leaf, the more showy one that has come in, not native, this butterfly cannot use that for its food source. So this endangered species of butterfly needs the native lupin. So when something comes in like this and spreads so wildly, it can crowd out of it, can affect kind of the natural life cycle. And of course, once we disrupt life cycles, then it can trigger lots of other things too. And so it's become controversial up there. Great beauty. Things are doing well, but also then it comes with a little bit of controversy too, as should we be allowing that to grow? So the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, they're not allowing it in their park system.
Okay.
They are controlling it so it doesn't take over there. But anybody driving along the North Shore of Duluth in June, I'm sure you've seen it.
And we were talking about this. The topic of lupins came up a couple weeks ago when we had
Lily Bina.
Yeah,
when we were talking about gardening, and she said, I want to plant lupins.
Yeah.
Have you tried lupins, John?
No, we haven't.
I have, and they've been a total failure for us. I bought 2 lupins here this spring. Going to try it again. So it's obviously not a cold hardy type thing, because if they survive the winters of Duluth, they should survive in Fargo. So, but the soil is vastly different on the North Shore versus the heavy clay soil in Fargo. So I'm sure that they need a highly organic or sandy organic type soil. So I'm going to amend heavily with organic matter, and I'm going to try them again.
All right. Well, let us know how that goes, because I'm really curious about that, because they are a beautiful looking plant and love to see those.
They are, yeah. And so I've wanted those in our perennial bed. I just have to find the right formula, and I believe soil is the way.
Well, so if anybody has questions, or if they want to send you something that they've done or that they've seen, their experiences with a plant or a flower or anything like that, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu. And if there's anyone in their perennial gardens that has found the formula for lupins, let me know.
Yeah. Here in the Red River Valley or anywhere. Yeah, that'd be great. Well, let's talk about what this late spring season means, because it's been kind of vexing for gardeners. It's been hard to kind of know when to get out. I gotta say, on was it Monday night, Tuesday night, we were out. We were covering up our plants that we had planted. We were pulling some things inside, or because it was going to get down to about freezing. There was a freeze warning. There's been a number of freeze warnings so far this spring.
Yes, and even for us humans, it's not been a real good spring for being outside and working out in the yard, just comfort-wise. It's been windy and chilly, and so we just haven't had consistently warm air temperatures, sunny days in the 70s and things. We just haven't had consistent warm weather. And also the soil has been slow to warm up too. So we have the air temperatures that have been chilly. The soil temperature has remained cool, slow to warm up. And so that has really caused the noticeable slowness in plants to respond. It's been relatively dry. We haven't had widespread rain. We had a little bit across, at least some of the region, this past week.
Yeah.
But we haven't had a nice, gentle, soaking rains. I remember the old farmers always said, preferably after they got their crops in, but they always said, well, now we need a good rain to kind of wake everything up. And so in May, if we could get some extended, just nice rainy days, it seems like that rain penetrating the soil warms the soil and also just wakes everything up. So because it was fairly dry, I think that also contributed to things not really kickstarting as much. So now I've noticed our hostas still are barely out of the ground, if at all. Our mulberry tree has not leafed out yet. And
I've seen a lot of trees that have not leafed out.
Yeah, that haven't really leafed out. And so I always suggest to people, give it the scratch test, scratch the twigs to make sure there's a green layer underneath. Our mulberry tree is fine. It's just taking its time. I think it decided just to wait until it knew the temperatures are okay. And so, there's a lot of things that are just kind of slow. Now, you mentioned that you protected from frost on some of your things. Now, we had bought, Mary and I had bought some plants at garden centers 2 weeks ago. The supply and the selection was good, we had bought, but then I've been taking them in and out of the garage, out during the day so that they could get some good sunshine and fresh air, and then back in at night on these chilly nights. The plants that I had in the basement, I took out and put in our cold frames, so they're out there. But I haven't really been able to open those frames up during the day and let them get a whole lot of extra sunshine and things. And so, and I didn't plant anything out yet, so I didn't have to cover anything yet. So, but boy, I have just delayed in planting. And so it's interesting. Hauling things in and out of the garage that can get fatiguing. But I mean, I'm not going to lose the plants that I bought. So, did you have to cover many things on the last?
We
frost?
covered, like I was saying, like our raised bed that has the leafy greens. We put a little blanket over that just to make sure that it didn't. Things didn't freeze. And then we planted some herbs in the garden and our tomatoes. And so we put flower pots upside down over those and then put a little sheet over the top of those just to make sure that they had a little bit of extra insulation. So hopefully, and that seems to have done okay with keeping things there. But yeah, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, more about how to deal with this late spring.
Local news affects your life. It gives you the confidence and clarity to make better decisions every day. You can support that with a digital subscription. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to take advantage of our introductory offer, just $6 for 6 months.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about this kind of a little bit of a late spring, although, Memorial Day seems to be fairly early this year relatively, but a late spring and a cool spring. What are some of the things that you've noticed about what are the things that you've heard about how are people going about trying to protect things that they already planted? So I think, a lot of people wanted to get out and plant with Mother's Day. How do you think people are dealing with stuff? Yeah,
well, the recent discussions on Facebook gardening groups have been interesting. When we've had recent frosts, before the frost, when they were still forecasting it, there has been interesting discussion on the Facebook gardening groups as to should we cover, how do we cover, and so it's interesting. So as kind of following some of these groups, someone asked the question, should I be covering my plants yet? Because I planted my garden already. And then so others would chime in and say, well, yes, you better cover, because if it's going to get down in the 30s, you could lose some of your stuff, so cover. Others said, I think they're going to be just fine. And so interesting discussion back and forth. And then some people commented, well, see, I told you that this is why I wait until Memorial Day. There are a few comments there. This is why I wait until Memorial Day, so I don't have to be covering them. So, and so there was some interesting back and forth. So now, is it a frost? Is it a freeze? Et cetera. So the freezing point of water is 32 degrees. So I use 32 degrees as a very serious point, because at 32 degrees, the water inside plant cells can freeze and rupture. And so once that happens, then the plant can collapse. So whether you call it a frost or a freeze, I use the 32 degrees as kind of that killing point on most plants. But now sometimes, we've talked about how some different types of plants, such as vegetables, some things can take a little bit of frost. We've talked about how, cabbage and radish and some of the types of things, peas, for example, couldn't be planted early because they can take a little bit of frost. Okay, well, how come they can take some frost at 32 degrees, and how come tomatoes can't take 32 degrees? Well, there's a couple of things going on. Some plants that will tolerate some 32 degrees have a sap that's almost like an antifreeze. Oh. And so that will prevent the water in the cells from freezing and bursting. And then other plants have a cell wall that is stronger, and so it doesn't let the cold air in to freeze the little droplets of water inside. And some cell walls are more elastic. So instead of rupturing at 32 degrees, they'll kind of flex and you won't have that damage. So certain plants are better adapted to withstanding 32 degrees. So at 32 degrees, though, if you have things of tropical nature out, like tomatoes and peppers, they didn't adapt naturally to surviving those. So I set 32 degrees as that's the watch out point for sure.
Okay.
And so if the forecast is 32 degrees of frost or freeze, then I protect anything that I've got outside that could be injured. But even some of our tropical type plants, for example, the tropical hibiscus that a person might have bought and moved outside, even if it's in the upper 30s, you could get chill injured. And tomatoes can easily be chill injured because they're tropical. They don't like it much below 50, really. And so when it gets even the upper 30s, they could be affected. Also, plants that we bought that were grown in a greenhouse, they had just a beautiful, almost a tropical-like climate inside a nice warm greenhouse, and those would be very susceptible also. So it was interesting to kind of listen to the Facebook gardening group, the chatter back and forth, and then also the discussion was, okay, well, if I need to protect, what do I do? How do I go about? What do I use? And one person in the discussion said, well, just cover with plastic. But it's interesting. Plastic can be pretty chilly on leaves. The best analogy that somebody once told me was, now in the winter when it's cold, would you rather have a plastic jacket or a cloth jacket? Well, I'd rather a cloth jacket. And so if a person wants to protect something with plastic, you should use stakes or other type of things to raise the plastic up off of the plants.
Okay.
For example, I had moved some of our geraniums out of the basement. I didn't have them in the cold frame, but I had some kind of wooden frames. So I put them under the wooden frames, and then I put plastic over that.
So it's lifted up.
Exactly. So it lifted up so the plastic isn't contacting the leaves, because plastic can transmit quite a bit of cold if it's contacting the leaf directly. But if it's up and off, and of course the geraniums, since I'd babied those all fall, winter, and early spring, I wasn't about to let anything happen. So on top of the plastic then, which was up elevated off the geraniums, I also put a couple old quilts.
Okay.
And so cloth is definitely more plant friendly for protection than plastic is. Cardboard boxes work well also. And something just to keep some warm air kind of around those plants. And so how did you protect? Old sheets? I love old sheets.
We did, what we did is we put in flower pots upside down around, like over our tomato plants, made sure that they had space around them, that they weren't being crushed. And then we did put a sheet over them or a blanket, like I said, blanket over our leafy green bed. And then the same thing for our herbs in the ground. We did the upside down flower pots and then put a sheet over them, and everything seems to have come out okay. So, but I remember last summer it was a little bit different. It wasn't weather. Well, it wasn't cool related, but we were going to have a really bad wind and rainstorm and hail, and our tomato plants were really coming along just great, and we didn't want to lose those. So we put in stakes all around the tomato plants, and we basically built a tent around them.
Oh, sure.
And then tried to lash the tent down so that it wouldn't blow away and rip things up. I can't say it worked because I don't know if they really would have been damaged otherwise. But I don't know about that. But yeah,
you read my mind about the wind part. One of the most difficult things protecting from frost is if the wind comes up before. So when we're out there trying to protect our stuff, if there's a cold wind and then you're trying to batten this covering down, and then of course, if it stays windy, usually there wouldn't be a frost. But in these spring frosts, what usually happens, okay, it'll be windy, you're trying to cover everything over using bricks and et cetera, and you're having a hard time. And then at some point in the middle of the night, the wind usually stops, the sky clears, the temperature plummets, and that's when we have the killing freezes, is in the middle of the night or maybe 3, 4 a.m. And so that's what makes it difficult is if we have that wind in the evening when you're trying to cover. Now, this last freeze, it seemed like the wind died down early enough, so a person didn't have quite so much struggle. I remember past freezes like that when that wind just, if it would only go down at sunset so you could get your stuff done before it's bedtime.
Yeah.
And, but, man, if that wind just won't go down and then it can whip off your covering and then, of course, leave things unprotected when the temperature does finally drop in the middle of the night.
Well, that's a good question, too. How much in advance should you put on these protections? And then how long should you leave them up? Because I remember when I left for work yesterday, there was still a frost warning. It was still about 34 degrees. And so I thought, well, I'll get them when I get back home at noon.
Yeah, and the preferred would be, because I know exactly what you meant, because these geraniums that I had to cover, when I left too, the temperature was still pretty cold when I left for work. And so as you did, I went home at noon on my lunch hour and took those off because the plants need light.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to languish. And so you got to get the covering off. And then also, the longer the covering is on, if it was contacting the plant, you can start getting some leaves crushed. And that can be as tough as if you didn't cover it. And so at a certain point, you've got to get those uncovered. An interesting thing, too, is if you have multiple nights that are going to freeze, you almost have to take that cover off. If the temperature rises during the day, take that off to give air and light to those plants. So how long should you leave those on? Leave them on as little as possible for short of a time frame as possible so that those plants can get light.
Would cardboard boxes work?
Yes, definitely. Cardboard boxes work well, and then get them off as soon as you can so that the plants can get the light that they need.
So overall, what effect do you think that the later spring has on the growing season?
So much is going to depend on what happens from here on out. Oh, I would love a crystal ball to see. Because, for example, if we have ideal growing conditions coming up in late May, June, July, August, and by ideal conditions, if we have sunny days in the high 70s and up to the mid 80s, just a beautiful stretch, not so much wind, then that growing conditions can be so ideal that things can catch up and surpass, even though we're a bit behind now. Things can catch up, and this could be the best on-target growing season that we've ever had, or maybe earlier. Harvests maybe be earlier based on what's going to happen. Or if we have a chilly June, July, August, then maybe this would be not a very good growing season. There have been growing seasons where tomatoes just struggled and you barely got a harvest just because it was so consistently cool the whole summer. And but on the upside, sometimes those cool summers are ideal for lettuce, radish, spinach, the things that don't bolt in warm weather. You get extended harvests of greens because they like it cool. But then the tomatoes and melons were a washout.
Right.
And so on the opposite side of that, sometimes you'll have just a banner year for tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, things that love it hot, peppers, and then your lettuce and spinach starts bolting in June already, and there went that crop. So it's interesting. The preferred, almost the ideal growing conditions are those where we get the high 70s, sunny days, not much over 85 maybe, and that kind of is a good blend between we get the warm season type things and your cool season things don't totally fall apart either. So that's really the preferred. Oh, and an inch of rain every 7 to 10 days. Then we would really not have to water much because that inch of rain would do our watering for us. And so I'm very hopeful that from here on out, so the success of this growing season is really going to depend on what happens from here on out. If we start getting consistent, beautiful growing weather, this could be one of the best years we've ever had. I remember a lot of the old timers saying, well, it was a slow spring. We didn't get our garden in until the end of May or maybe even the first week in June. It was the best garden we ever had. I heard that quite a few times. But again, it depends what happens from that point on forward.
All right, let's take another quick break. When we come back, more with how to deal with this late spring season.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about kind of what's been a little bit of a late spring season. And so, Don, is there anything we can do? Well, when the spring has been so kind of cool, we haven't been able to really get out there and get too much done. And because it's been so cool, haven't done the things that we've thought we should do. What can we do to kind of help things along?
This would be a good spring and early summer to give plants every possible benefit that we could add to them. And one of those, I mentioned, just rototilled our garden, so we'll be planting our garden over the next few days. So I'm going to give the tomato plants, the pepper plants, all the transplants, I'm going to water them in with a starter fertilizer. And you can buy at garden centers fertilizers called starter fertilizers. They're a liquid type or a granule that you mix up, water soluble, and you water those in after planting your tomato plants and pepper plants. And it gives kind of a nice, mild nutrition. So immediately those roots have nutrition to start off. So that can get those root systems going a little quicker, kind of a quick upstart on those. And kind of kickstart is what I was trying to say. And so then also with our vegetables to make sure that they have the nutrition going forward, whether it's a granular type that a person puts, like around our potatoes. I always put a little bit of granular, like 10-10-10 or a good fertilizer like that around. So to give them the nutrition that they need. So I think this is going to be an important year for giving fertilizer like to those. And also the planters. We're going to be doing up our outdoor planters this weekend. So we'll fertilize them with a starter fertilizer. And even though the potting mix might say that it has the slow release that feeds, it's important to supplement that with a water-soluble type, maybe every 7 to 10 days even. So I think this, again, it's going to be important to keep the nutrition up on those, and that greatly will speed growth along. Now, our rose bushes had severe dieback this year. The canes were dead down to about 3 inches above ground level on most. So most of the growth coming on the roses is way down at the base, and so they got a lot of growing to do in order to get some canes high enough to bloom. And so to kickstart and give them the nutrition, because roses are heavy feeders, I like that term, heavy feeders, that respond well to fertilizer. And so I'm going to give them a water-soluble type. Each rose bush will get about 3 gallons of solution that'll pour down in, so that'll get down into the root system. And so I will do that shortly, probably over this weekend, and again in June. I'll give them another fertilizer. And so again, to boost that along. And so I think very important for those. And anything new that you planted, even trees and shrubs, boost with some extra fertilizer and things. And also any of the perennials that I'm planting new, since I'm maybe a little delayed, not late, but a little delayed, I'm going to make sure I work plenty of organic matter down into perennial plantings and things that I do to kind of get those started a little quicker.
Speaking of fertilizer, one of the things that you've always said is that the best time to fertilize your lawn is around Memorial Day. With it having been so cool so far, does that kind of push that back a little bit, or should we still be getting out there and fertilizing this Memorial Day time, around Memorial Day?
The lawns like the cool weather. So they haven't minded. I think I'm on my third mowing already.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the third mowing. Our lawn has seemed to enjoy this cool weather. Plus, we got a little bit of rain, not quite a half an inch over the last week. And so our lawn grass is enjoying the cool weather. I guess that's why they call them cool season grasses up in our area. And so now, because it's growing so well, it's in need of nutrition also. So around Labor Day here is the recommended time to fertilize a lawn. So I am going to stop at the garden center, get some bags of lawn fertilizer, and try to get that in before the rain that's coming. It's interesting. Anytime we get a rain in the spring or towards Memorial Day, there's always a little flush of people fertilizing their lawns because, of course, the granules need moisture to dissolve them and get down into the root system. And so I'm going to try to beat there's a little rain in the forecast. So if you see me out trying to get the vegetable garden in, running around the yard with the fertilizer spreader and everything else, I'm trying to beat the rain.
You're going to have a busy couple days.
I'll be busy. I'll get my steps in.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, this has been very helpful because I think, like I said, this has maybe been a little bit of a trying spring for some gardeners, but this is helpful. It gives us a little bit of indication of things that we can do to stay on top of things, or maybe give things just a little bit of push that they need.
Yep, I'm optimistic. If we had just days in the 90 degrees and windy, those are awful springs. So, if you have to take one extreme or the other, this coolness is okay because I think things are going to be okay. Things can turn the corner quickly. This could be one of the best growing seasons ever.
All right. Well, if people have questions for you about questions, whether they're lawn or they're a garden, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu. And thank you for everyone who is writing in. We get a nice number of emails in the mailbag.
And pictures are good, too.
Pictures are awesome. Yes, and thanks, Nicole sent the article that you mentioned. And so count the day lost, you don't learn something new. I learned much more about lupins than I knew before.
All right. Well, you have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening.